It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing The Saint of Bright Doors by Vandra Chandrasekhara. Shall I do the plot? Or
yes.
Shall you? Okay, I'm going to do the plot. All right, we are in fantasy Sri Lanka. It is approximately now. Our hero is born and then his shadow is immediately ripped away from him by his mother, who is a wizard.
And a lesbian.
And she puts him on a path, training him from a young age to kill his father, who is also a wizard.
But not a lesbian.
But not a lesbian, no. Although he is gay, or gay-ish. And we basically follow our hero Fetter's path through moving to the big city, getting over his abused or his abusive and traumatic childhood with his toxic mother, and then realizing it's not that easy as the political and magical realities of the world come crashing in on him. Does that do it?
Yeah, I think so.
So, as we've discussed, there are in fact wizards and lesbians in this book, and
there are other lesbians who are not Fetter's mother, and they are also in conflict with the biggest wizard, which is Fetter's father. So
yes, but despite the fact that Fetter himself is not a lesbian, although he is bi, as most people in this world seem to be.
Yes. But, this book is this is still a wizards versus lesbians book. It's just that it is told, focusing on the person who the battle is playing out via.
Fetter is the battlefield upon which a conflict between a wizard and a lesbian is being fought.
And a variety of lesbians.
And a variety of lesbians are being fought, yes. So there's that. Why should you read this book?
Well, I knew from the last line of the first chapter that you, Isaac, should read this book. It's really good, is the main reason you should read the book.
Yeah, this one is your real literature, and I want to say that the for full disclosure, the author of this book gave this podcast a little goose on social media a little while before we're recording this. And that has nothing to do with my reaction to this book, which is A, this is about me, and B, this is the best written thing that I've read for this podcast in a very long time. That's basically all that I have to say about it. This is a great book, in my opinion. But yes, also...
The prose is particularly good, I think.
It is. Also, my opinion should be shaped by the fact that hit very close to home for me in a lot.
Yeah, I would say the fact that this hits close enough to home to you that in some ways it almost feels autobiographical. That is why you should take it with a grain of salt. I, on the other hand, I found certain parts of it to be very relatable. I did not find it hitting quite so close to home, but still think it's a fantastic book.
Indeed. As to why you shouldn't read it, it's extremely upsetting.
It's extremely upsetting.
Once again, I don't know how true that will be for everybody, but it also contains a lot of very very painful stuff about contemporary politics, and a lot of very, very bad things happen.
And a lot of painful stuff about interpersonal relationships.
Yes, it really gets you coming and going, and it takes a whack at a lot of the sort of coping mechanisms that those of us in the developed world have to deal with this kind of things on its way. So this is a book for afflicting the comfortable, I would say, and also potentially for comforting the afflicted, depending on how you feel after you've gotten through it. Yeah. Second part, not guaranteed, subject to change. Content warnings.
Oh God.
Genocide.
A great deal of violence.
A great deal of violence in the
extremely toxic, abusive
genocide.
Parents.
Yep. The Fetter commits his first murder at the age of 10. although he's not sure how old he is. It's a
and it is described like it is not a gentle off-screen murder. It is,
this book
it
shies away
manages to
from
be
nothing.
funny, but yes,
yeah, yes, he commits his comedic first murder at the age of 10. This book is. I should perhaps mention that this book is also very funny, in a very, very dark way.
Yes.
And I think that, genocide covers a lot. No,
I don't actually think that genocide does cover a lot, because like the way that you depict genocide can vary pretty drastically. This, for example, doesn't actually pay a lot of attention to the sexual assault aspects of genocide.
That is true. That is actually very true. Because this particular genocide is being committed by a sort of an anti-sex polity, which means that if there is sexual assault as part of genocide, it's not the overt terroristic kind. You can do, like, a genocide occurred in the last book that we talked about, and it is not nearly as upsetting or immediate as the way that it's treated in this one either. So, murder, torture, burning people to death.
Also, there's a lot of bad things that go on that aren't part of deliberate genocide. There's also just a lot of murdering political prisoners for unknown reasons, which may not actually necessarily be genocide. Sometimes you can't, because part of the thing is that this is happening in an atmosphere where there's sufficient political repression and violence that sometimes you can't actually know which thing is the reason why these random civilians got murdered.
So content warning: realistic description of life during wartime. Basically.
Well, of life during it's realistic description of life under a extremely repressive authoritarian regime that's committing a great deal of political violence, much of it internal.
Yes. No, part of the point of the book is that that a lot of the violence that is being committed by the government is violent in its randomness and in its lack of attention. The terror is that there is in fact nobody in charge. So, having said all that, shall we get around to talking about the book?
Yeah, spoiler zone time.
Spoiler zone. Right. So I don't even know where to begin in terms of the thing that I really liked about this book. Maybe I'll start with just the bones of it, the structure.
Okay, yeah.
So on one level, this is sort of a book about people with special powers, right? And I believe, like, in a recent episode, I think it was in the Water Outlaws, I was like, I don't care about superheroes, I don't care about that kind of like, special powered people. But this one is like really all about what it's like to live as a person who thinks that they are special.
Right. I think part of why this works is because it's about, to some degree, it's, it is still going into these sort of special powers as a metaphor for being a gifted child, but this is special powers as the metaphor for being a gifted child who burned out and failed to live up to any of your potential and is now drifting aimlessly through life, and which makes it a little bit more palatable. It's also hard to, like, these aren't necessarily inborn special powers. It's what happens when you were a runner-up to being a chosen one, and then something of whatever your respective faith tradition is, because we get to see a bunch of them, and then something happens so that you were not the one who was chosen.
Yes. One of the first thing that made me think, oh God, this book is going to be really, really funny is the sentence, he's not the only feral child of a messiah in his social group. Which is,
I was pretty sure it was going to be funny from the second sentence about, after talking about his shadow being pinned to earth, be like, this is his first memory, the seed of many hours of therapy to come.
Yes, no, the central, like, tension of the book that drives a lot of the humor is that this takes place in a, like, part of the time dilation of the time tension between the sort of prehistoric matriarchy that his mother represents and the hyper-modernity that he lives in is sort of the driving engine of the book in a lot of ways, but it's also the driving engine of a lot of humor that, what do you do when your shadow is torn away and you're raised by a witch woman to murder your father? You go to therapy about it and also
right.
go to a support group with other failed children of messiahs.
Right.
But what I was going to point out was that there's, but he still has, these special powers that he uses over the course of the narrative. But
yes,
there is
float, which is a great metaphorical.
Oh yeah,
his shadow, having been torn from him, means that he is no longer fully attached to the ground, and whenever he stops concentrating a little bit, he just starts to float away, which is, great metaphorical, magical thing right there.
A great metaphor for trying to find your place in the world when you have been prepared for a place in the world that you cannot occupy.
Yes.
And there's a lot of great metaphors about like doubled consciousness and about, being an artist and the responsibility of being charismatic. And by the way, when I say double consciousness, we don't stop at double consciousness. Federer's got like 5 different layers of consciousness going on at any one time.
Yes.
But I think the thing that makes this work so well is that the book goes back and forth between more introspective bits where Federer is thinking about his powers in terms of his own individuation, and so we're concentrating on the metaphorical heft of them, which is important for a good superhero story. And then we have these other set pieces where it's just, okay, we're taking these powers seriously, even though they are metaphors. And we're like, okay, what is this? How does this work in like an action set piece?
Right,
Which
and
we
suddenly
actually
it's
have
like,
in this book.
actually the ability to float or Federer's immunity to fire becomes, like he actually does figure out how to use this in very specific, to break it and enter, or to suicide bomb, but it's not a suicide bomb because he's immune to fire.
But specifically because he negotiated with his own metaphor to be like,
yes.
Does that mean I'm also immune to explosions? And it's like kind of okay,
right.
Which is fantastic. This is a good exercise for life. Try to figure out what your metaphors are and see if there's any wiggle room. See if they're willing to admit another aspect. You may find that inside an invisibility guy, there's a flight guy waiting to get out.
Right, and I think this book does a really good job of being just sort of meta and self-conscious enough that it can get away with this sort of thing, but not being obnoxiously so to the point that one might get irritated. I mean, everyone has a different tolerance for these things, but it does a lot of work in little asides, and that it was very efficiently with 1 or 2 words, and that I think allows it to pull off a lot of things that it could not. That another book would just come off as being smarmy or obnoxious.
Absolutely. The reason that I bring it up, though, is because the book is sort of structured as like one set piece followed by another set piece followed by another set piece, and then these different set pieces are focusing on different thematic things and are also sort of different little genres of activity. Like this is the social commentary part, followed by it's all social commentary.
It's all social commentary.
But like this is the part where we're discussing, where we're focusing on social roles, and this is the part where we're focusing on this wacky science thing, and this is the part we're focusing on this. But and everything is metaphorically tied together, and it all pursues the same theme, but because we're doing so different things over the course of the book, it never gets old, it never drags, I'm never bored. There were
definitely parts where it dragged a bit for me, but it does change things. Like the part where he's in the prison camp, the like endless prison camps.
The depression arc. Yes.
Right, exactly, right? The depression arc, unsurprisingly, did drag a little bit, but it's fortunately, even there, he doesn't stay doing any one thing for too long, and that definitely helps.
I liked the depression arc in this book more than I like the depression arc in pretty much any other book that we've done that's had a depression arc.
Yes, but part of that is because this book is so laser targeted at you that you're going to give it a lot of credit.
Yes, but I'm let me say for why. Because like over the course of the depression arc, he is, the depressed, immobilized, terrorized guy, but he's also over the course of the depression arc, a clerk and a minor functionary at the office of one of the 4,000 little compartments in this prison. So he's got the government clerk job, but then he's also a witch doctor for a different part of the depression arc.
Yes.
It's just like, these are activities that one can do while one is in one's depression arc. Yes. And he just moves from one to the other until he finally gets to the place in the prison where he's supposed to go in the first place, and then is immediately grabbed by a cop on a bicycle and taken away.
Yes.
Back to the beginning of the prison. It's so good. But anyway.
Also, just and again, there's some really great. This book has great imagery, which again is done very efficiently. It doesn't describe things in great detail, but it doesn't necessarily need to, because it just tells you, Feder is having to sit balanced on this bike while the cop is bicycling him through the concentration camp.
Right. And they're trying to make conversation over the course of days of bicycling, where he's handed off from one cop to another. But, but that was sort of the point that I was, so that's one thing, right? And then there's this thing where it's like the tension between metaphor and reality. Like the book has magic and it also has stuff that's very, very modern. Like the cult talks about its social media strategy. The followers of the cult are referred to as a fandom.
Yes.
But
there's a crowdfunding campaign to bring Feder's father to the city that he's settled into.
Yes, indeed. I love it so much, but
like and it's failed several times. Like,
but that's also part of the point of the book, because I think that one of the major themes of the book, in addition to the the mom and dad stuff, which we will get to, is this what I think is this very sort of Marxist, actually, idea of social legibility. There's a lot in this book about trying to make the numinous understood. The funniest and the most on the nose part is where he's in the abandoned mall with Pipra, and she's constructed this essentially torture device to make somebody look at a door.
Yes, the titular bright doors. So the bright doors happen only in the city that Feder has found himself in.
Mostly in the city, but sometimes in the outskirts.
And they just sort of, if you leave a door that doesn't have any transparent parts closed long enough, sometimes it will randomly become an unopenable door with just wall and the door to nowhere as far as anybody can tell. And at one point, Feder, one of my that is definitely one of my favorite arcs, is Feder with the student scientists who are trying to figure things out about the doors, and have just taken the new grad student on the project, has been strapped down and eyes strapped open so that the door can be constantly stared at so that it can't translate.
Yes, exactly. But if you look at it right out of the corner of your eye, it exists in superposition. So you have to rotate the chair a certain number of degrees so that it's exactly the right corner of your eye.
Yes, and it's great partly because it works really well. One of the things that's, of course, a pet peeve of mine is when magic gets over-explained and over-systematized in novels. And I like that you get this attempt to systematize it, but because you're seeing the early stages of the science, you can watch them make it up as they go along. They steal a term from Feder, which at first Feder's like, oh, well, the door's got to be frustrated. And they're like, stop anthropomorphizing the door. And then, 2 weeks later, they're like, we refer to this as the frustration load on the door.
Exactly. But the thing is that, but this is also the central theme of the book, is exactly that, is how, to what extent is science, is magic, and magic means a lot of things in this book, describable and systematizable, and what does that mean? And so the bright doors, it turns out, are portals through which the invisible laws and powers of the world can enter from other...
AKA demons or devils.
From other empty realms.
And empty realms represent avenues of history that have been closed off, to at least to this world.
I want to keep calling them the individual laws and powers because the worst joke in the book makes use of that, and I love the worst joke in the book too much.
Yes, the possession is 9/10
Possession
of the
is
lore.
9/10 of the law and power.
Of the lore. It's of the lore.
Oh my god, that's even worse. I didn't get that from the audio. Oh, that's awful. Congratulations for not removing that. That's a darling that many would have killed, but you kept it, and kudos to you. But anyway, these creatures that come out represent other possibilities, basically. And the frustration load is sort of like at what point does the frustration that we have for living in this awful world that we're currently living in, that these characters in this book are currently living in under this, totalitarian, chaotic government that kills at random. And how do you keep those doors closed if you're that government? And systemization is one way, using European race science. And one of the funniest things about this book is how Europe is just this completely unimportant backwater plague-ridden shithole that just happened to come in and give them their terrible race science and then left again. And it's just over in the corner and it doesn't matter at all.
That nobody understands exactly where they fit in the race, because it's there's your race, but also your caste, but also your class, and everybody has a card that spells this out, but it's in some sort of weird code that nobody can quite understand, except of course the people for whom you can understand just enough to know why you can't so and so can't be your mentor, but the people who actually understand it tend to be the people who have some form of power.
Isabel Wilkerson wrote a book called Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents. In this book, she argues that the American system of scientific racism that we developed in the 18th and 17th centuries has more in common with the Indian caste system than with other forms of racial discrimination. Ever since I read this book, I've wondered if it's acceptable to ask, for example, the two Republican presidential candidates of Indian descent this year what caste their families came from. Am I just trying to update the almanac? Sort people into yet more social categories? Or am I trying to get to the bottom of some deeply entrenched privilege that's invisible otherwise? I don't know, but I don't know who's writing the almanac either. Alexis tells me that this is very much a thing already in leftist Desi discourse in the U.S., and also that Nikki Haley is Sikh, which I had no idea. Yeah, and as Feder actually begins to understand that part more, he sort of begins to lose his ability to parse anything else.
Yes, which is good. I actually want to go back to the doors for a second, to the idea of the doors being history, because it's not just the frustration of, to me, a former historian, I read this not just as the frustration of the world that we live in, it's also, this is also very much a story of the violence of the colonial archive.
Yes.
And, one of the things that these doors can also represent are the histories where there was an oral history, and then enough people were killed off to remove the oral tradition. Or this actually happened a lot in South Asia. There was an actual imperial archive, or, princely kingdom archive that the colonial powers just burned. Sometimes they would bother to translate it and then burn it, and sometimes they just burned it. But of course, if it exists at all, it's only in translation. And so it's also these histories, because of course you can suppress these histories, but stuff is still going, even if the oral tradition has been very broken, and the whole thing with the Walker prophecy is a great example. I
was going to say that, yeah, exactly.
Even when your oral tradition has been consciously or unconsciously broken, there's still enough cultural memory and trauma that that, you know, this stuff, again, this frustration builds up, and there's this, even if you can never access it and anything that can come through is invisible, there's still this sense that there is this entire alternate past behind this door that you're no longer allowed to open.
Yeah, 100%. I think that these are both valid readings of the Bright Doors. I think there are probably a number of other valid readings of the Bright Doors.
Yes.
It's sort of the central metaphor of this book.
Yes, but there's a lot of metaphors in this book. So one of the things that allows this book, I think, to do such a good job with having all of its metaphors do triple, quadruple, quintuple duty, but it actually work, is the fact that it's very consciously existing in a world where there are multiple, mutually contradictory belief systems, and to the people who are part of them, they are equally real. So, and they still affect each other somewhat. So, like, all of the unchosen people in Fetter's group get affected by this one weird side effect from that one member of them has with his magical voice.
Yes.
But it's not legible to them. It's just that, something is still, there's still something resonating there. But because, to some degree, it's so clear that this is Fetter's story. We're seeing it through, it's focused on Fetter. And those, now that we're in the spoiler zone, it is actually being told by his his shadow, who's just been like following him around the entire time. But so, you could also tell this story from Coel's point of view, or from any of the other people in his support group's point of view, and it would be a completely different story, but there would still be these points of overlap. And because of that, the Bright Doors, for example, can serve multiple metaphorical duty, because you understand that there's other people going around in the city who have a completely different relationship to the Doors. And so that's, they're forced to do metaphorical multiple duty.
Are these metaphors overdetermined, or are you not determined enough? And you don't even have to go outside Fetter to get that, again, because there's five of him balanced on top of each
there's
other.
Fetter, there's his, there's Fetter as we have, who's gone through therapy. There's Fetter, the son of the prophet. There's Fetter, the unchosen, discarded son of the prophet, whose mother has raised him to systematically violate all 5 of the unforgivable sins, including matricide. The great line where she's like, remember, the first unforgivable sin is matricide, and after that you won't have me around anymore.
Right. You have to do them in order. But Fetter, Hedge's boyfriend, and Hedge lives in the liberal city,
Right, because Hedge is just high enough class that he has access to all these things that Fetter doesn't, but is in a position where it's totally okay for him to slum it and date this guy who came in during one of the waves when they were allowing refugees.
One of the many, many great little details in this is that this country operates under this city operates under 2 entirely separate courts of law, the Storm Court and the Summer Court. And Hedge works for the Summer Court, which is the nice court, which plans the nice kind of plague management.
Yes.
And the Storm Court is the one that does the interning and is the anti-sodomy laws and all of that. And it's like these 2 political parties. I mean, it feels like center left and center right to me, by American standards.
Oh, but the thing is, it's not even political parties, right? It's all the same government. It's just, we don't do that part.
That's the point that I was trying. That's the point that I was trying to get to, because it is also, in terms of political parties, all part of the same system, right? So
no, I think no, because that's different, right? Political parties are saying that the political parties are the same is a very different statement from saying the functions of the government are all by the same government, and that the money that we pay for the post office is. The post office is part of the same government that starts all these wars.
The post office is self-funding. Let me just.
The post office is self-funding. Yes.
Anyway,
but it is. But the post
digress,
office is still governed by the same government.
It's a meaningful distinction. The government's been trying to shut us down since the 1930s by limiting what we can own, what we can do with it, and what we can spend our money on. Different branches of the government can be in open conflict with each other and still basically serve the same master.
Right?
It is,
and
yes.
you know what? I'm sure that the Storm Court and the Summer Court claim that, they have completely different separate pools of funding.
Indeed.
So
This is we don't need to get into the political depths there.
Right.
There's plenty of other stuff to talk about. But the point is that Hedge, is sort of this aspirational, if the Feder that just wanted to be Hedge's boyfriend could have just been Hedge's boyfriend, he might have been able to go out to the country and be safe with Hedge during the White Year, and he might have just become another, relatively upper class protected citizen of this society.
Yeah.
Until such times the Storm Court decided that he should be killed.
Well, but the thing is that maybe they wouldn't. I mean, there's the great moment where...
Or they wouldn't.
There's the great moment where, he's presented with... Where Federer's presented with 4 bodies and they are named for him as, like, all these people who've been meaningful. And then, a little bit later, the book goes into an aside about what actually happened, that these 4 are not those people, because those 4 people who were meaningful to Federer were all protected and untouchable in a different way. In some cases, it's because they were successfully able to go underground and hide.
Right.
And in another case, it's because he's in this it's Federer's boyfriend who's in this protected enclave where he's having a, plague vacation.
Right. And Pippa, my favorite of them, who just accidentally, one of her patrons sent a letter, and she's she's like way up in the Perfect and Kinds organization. And so she was just protected entirely by accident. It would have been too much of a pain in the ass to get that part to unprotect her so that this part could get her. Right.
And in particular, part of why she's protected is simply because of, some bureaucratic infighting.
Right, exactly.
So... Right, and then there's also there's Federer, Hedge's boyfriend. There's Federer, who's pretending to be this who's masquerading as Perot or Perot. I don't know how the audiobook did it.
Perot, the audiobook said.
Perot, who so there's Federer who's pretending to be a student, and then of course there's Federer's shadow. Yeah,
and Federer and I love that Federer sort of becomes Perot more and more just because it's such an obviously better person to be.
Yes. Until he's forced to be Federer again by the violence of the state.
Well, no. He's forced to be Federer again by his own brain, which all the time is still working because my absolute favorite part of the book, and I know I've said that about 5 different parts already, is the way that Federer's decision that he is in fact going to kill his dad happens without him realizing it, but it is his decision.
Yes.
Like he's like, oh, okay, I can get this information and go there. And that's like all of his childhood, agent training that his mother gave him.
Yes.
Which is doing this information extraction and infiltration while all the time he's being Perot the student. And so he doesn't notice until such time as his other self just steps outside of his life. It literally says he takes 2 steps out of his life to the right to pick up the tooth. Yeah. And destroys everything.
Yes. And of course destroys everything for him. His father has the ability to rewrite history and thus rewrites history so that it never touches him.
But if that hadn't happened, he would still have gotten most of the people who know him killed in that moment.
Right.
And
no,
he
if that
only
hadn't
thinks
happened,
about
it would have
this
actually
a day
been
later.
Worse.
Right?
So,
which is insane. I love the fragmentation of Federer's consciousness and the way that it's written, and how he becomes so out of it at certain times and places that is completely unaware of why. Exactly. Right. No, it's great dissociation, but also not only is he not aware of why he's doing it.
PTSD from having his shadow ripped from him as a baby and then being raised by a just incredibly toxic, abusive person to be an assassin.
Yeah, the first time when he really goes catatonic, he thinks it's because he saw a demon come out of a bright door. And he tells Hedge that it's because his mom called him and she's dying. And it probably is because his mom called him and
Right.
she's dying, you know?
Right, but because
and like which part of him is lying, he doesn't even know.
Well, it's, the demon is coming out of the bright door. It says past resurface, like literally resurfacing.
Right, exactly.
The way that his mother can call and it does not matter. He didn't even realize he had a landline until his mother calls it. And then after that, it does not matter what part of the phone he destroys. She can always call. It's a great little touch.
That particular instance, because that's also where the terrible joke is. It's like, he lies to Hedge or possibly to himself about why he's upset. He goes catatonic, and then the landline rings, and it's like the past has come to collect. Here's the correct order of events. First, he's reading about his own childhood in an anthropology textbook. Then the terrible joke is unleashed, and then his mother calls him on an unplugged landline. The theme is temporal flexibility. You can use all of your little, modern therapies and your modern social medias and your modern, gay relationships and your modern self-help groups. But here comes the past. And it is going to exact a price from you. And I also love the way that he reacts when his mother tells him her origin story the first time. Because this I really related to. Because there's a part of you that's sitting there listening to this story, and you listen to the story and you put the phone down and you're like, and you conceptualize it. It's like, oh, that's interesting. That kind of gives me an insight into myself potentially. It might be It might be helpful for me to understand myself and to work on myself at therapy.
Right.
Whereas, and not realizing that you've just been exploded, like you're the walking wounded at that point. Like your heart's dead.
Yeah.
And only gradually does that actually catch up to your brain, which has immediately sealed it off into this little oh, how does this fit into my narrative box?
Right. Yeah.
Which I thought was incredibly well observed.
No, I agree. And, and it does the thing where it makes it, Feder gets drawn back into his mother's orbit, and part of me is like, no, Feder, you were doing so well, but also it's inescapable for him. And also, and then she tells her story, and she was legitimately wronged. Her people were in fact the target of genocide, and completely dispossessed. But she's a great charismatic abusive mom, in that she can definitely bring the reader into being on her side, in a way that makes you understand why Feder, trying to choose between two incredibly awful parents instead of successfully being able to escape them both, ends up, at least for a while, sort of deciding that he's going to side with his mother. Even as she's actively undermining him and, telling him that, I gotta say, the doctor says it's cancer, my heart or whatever, but it's actually disappointment in you. I gotta say, I heard that in your mother's voice.
Yeah, no, that felt like,
I remember you can edit this out if you want. I remember your mother doing that with me, being like, oh yes, I'm dying. How nice of you to get back in touch. I'm dying.
My mother's favorite thing to do is to weaponize her impending death, which she's been doing for literally the last 20 to 25 years, and she hasn't died yet, as far as I know.
Well, don't call her to check, please.
No, I won't. But the other great thing about that is that he tries to interrupt her, but she's rehearsed the line.
Right.
She really wants to get this line.
Yes,
so she
exactly.
stops when he interrupts her and then says the whole line from the beginning again to make sure that it has the desired impact.
Yes.
And it's like, as with all of these things, it's like, heartbreaking in the moment, but objectively, it's also quite funny.
It is extremely funny.
And then of course later she says, I wasn't saying that to be mean. Matricide was first on the list. You're killing me. That's one of the things that I wanted you to do. Exactly.
No, see, and that was the part that I heard in my mother's voice.
Oh my god. No, I don't think we need to edit any of that out.
Okay,
This is
we can
important
keep
context.
it in. Yes. Yes, no, Mother of Glory. The fact that, she is simultaneous, that she claims to have no name at all, which is also just a great, like, wave at the way that both at colonial violence in naming practices, but also at the way that, history gets lost. And also that history gets edited out by people when it's inconvenient to them. So, the fact that she's simultaneously Mother of Glory and the Ugly, and both come from this, colonial power cult that is centered on Fetter's father.
Right. And this particularly felt true to me because this is another thing that I think my mother might recognize if she felt like she needed to, is that, you have two choices. You can be named, the undesirable, the ugly, nasty, uppity woman, or you can be named
For your
mother of
children.
this son.
Yeah.
Yes. And so she has to be defined by her son, because because there are two options available to her, and that's the better one. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't resent the fact that she is called Mother of Glory, that like her entire essence has been boiled down to mothering this child. And
Yes.
of course then she tries to make mothering this child into the biggest fuck you imaginable,
Yes.
a deadly one. But the fact that this is the thing that we keep coming back to with our toxic mothers. The best bad mothers, from Mother Desane to the thesis advisor from the outside, is that they all have a point.
Yeah.
There is a good amount of truth and a good amount of real power and real magic mixed up in the fact that she raised her child to be a literal murderer, from the age of
Right. Well,
5,
because, the thing is that if they don't have some sort of point, or at least if they don't have a compelling narrative, the thing is that people like that in real life, sometimes they have a point and sometimes they don't, but they get by on charisma. But it's real hard to get that charisma to shine through the page. And part of how you do, and part of how an author can do that is to make the character likable. And another way that the author can do that is to give the character a sympathetic story.
It's not just about being sympathetic. It's about being right about some things. If you're a floating boy who's trying to understand a confusing world, being confronted by a complete moral system that is partially verifiable, it can be very tempting.
And, Mother of Glory is darkly funny, and has a sympathetic, story and grievances. The darkly funny is what gets her through the first part of the book for the reader, where you're like, well, you're awful, but you're so entertainingly awful that I'm still enjoying reading you on the page.
Right.
And that's like her wedge in to being, so then she presents the story and you're like, oh, there is some, actual grievance there. And also at this point you've seen, even though you haven't actually seen Fetter's father at all, you've seen the way that the two sects of the two like split sides of his cult have been committing all manner of genocide, and then, calling for peace on both sides, which is whether that's between them and the people that they're committing genocide against, or between, one side of the path and the other side of the path and nobody else matters, is, left conveniently ambiguous.
Yes. Meanwhile, the pathless get in the shorts from both of them constantly.
Yes. Right. But, but because you don't see Fetter's father for so long, she, Mother of Glory gets to really frame the narrative.
Absolutely. That's part of what happens when you're an absent father.
Right. And so, as a result, this is another thing I think that the book does very effectively, is that even as you're going, no, Fetter, don't do it, you can, know exactly why he's making these choices.
Yeah. And it's like, it works with the magic and without it. Like,
Yeah.
as he takes the train north to visit his mother, he's doing it to kill his father. This works just as well without the magical tooth as it does with the magical tooth. You know, and the fact that he can't actually kill his father by doing that works in both senses as well. You know.
Yeah.
And
So
oh boy,
let's talk about the lesbians.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly
Because
where
there's
I was
actually
going next.
there's some great lesbian characters in here. There's Mother of Glory's ex, who is the what is it? Ambassador
Envoy extraordinary,
and
ambassador
plenipotentiary.
plenipotentiary,
Yes.
or something along those lines. But who tells him to call her the ordinary?
Well,
which is just
first she's
such
like,
a knife
first
in
she's
the heart.
like, no. She's like, well, my friends call me extraordinary, and then she says, but we're practically family, so you can call me ordinary.
Everything in this book that's named with a capital N contains its opposite. From the mother of glory and the ugly, to the extraordinary and the ordinary, to the fettered and the unfettered. And that suggests that all these systems that try to categorize and name every aspect of the human condition contain the seed of their own destruction. The shadow waits in the database. Oh man, and like that sinking, oh, I really fucked up feeling that he gets when he's in there, where he's like, I should either have come here way sooner or not at all.
Or not at all, yeah.
Yeah, that felt...
Your
that
mom's
felt like
your mom's lesbian ex who's trying to sort of be a safe haven for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it's my mom's best friend, because my mom is, one of her major tragedies was her heterosexuality, but you know, same sort of a deal. And the way that she listens to the story, to Fetter's retelling of his mom's version of events, and it's like, oh yeah, that's basically accurate, if incredibly, infuriatingly self-aggrandizing. And self-obsessed and all of this.
Basically accurate. But there's also, she's also like, I don't actually remember the details that well. I mean, Mother of Glory has made her entire identity about both remembering what was taken from her people and also remembering the grievances done, that she has. So obviously, everyone else feels like they have to defer to her memory because they just didn't invest as much of themselves into remembering.
Yeah, no, there's a definite sort of like, there is a feminism afoot in this book, which is, terrifying, but also not like, not one-dimensional either, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And but yeah, and then there's Cole, who has had one of her ex-lover, who is a woman, either was killed in one of the white years, either by the government or by the plague, and it doesn't really matter which.
Yeah. And Cole is a radical pamphleteer and avant-garde playwright.
Yes,
I love the distinction. She had written and produced 2 plays, one of which cannot be performed but can be spoken of, and the other of which cannot even be spoken of.
Yes, no, the bit with Cole and the play particularly gave me Stalinist USSR vibes, because a lot of the sort of ongoing tension there was like, what art can be performed, what kind of art can be performed. Or, for example, in East Germany with the Stasi, like, we're going to give you enough rope that you make the art that gets you killed.
Well, this is also actually, having just worked on a book on theater in the greater Sinosphere, there's a great story.
Maybe this is a human thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, no, this is specifically a making art under an authoritarian government thing. The way that she has to put things past the censors, and then it's like, well, how long can this play go before it gets shut down? And there's some, great stories of, oh, well, there's this one scene in the play, and so the censors are there, and they like take the censors out back for a smoke break, and stall them until that scene happens, and then go, well, it was great talking to you, let's go back in.
And it's like, it's a sort of I also like how it's a power of art thing where it's like, yes, art has a certain amount of power.
Right. And also there are limits. Like,
Yeah,
Cole's art definitely was somewhat useful in framing some of the narrative and in helping, and also in helping her cultivate the kind of connections that allow her to not get disappeared and then set on fire.
She has to be a society figure in order for this to work.
Right.
But of course, that means she has to be co-opted to a certain extent and to perform a role of like the sort of the letting off of steam, if you will, the abatement of frustration. Because that's sort of part of how the artist works in a setting like this. As they point out, like, the people arm themselves to go see the dangerous art without looking at what the dangerous art is pointing at.
Yes.
Which is another great observation.
But also, there's a pretty hard limit on how much she can accomplish. I mean, to some degree, this book is an exploration of how true is it, the thing that Mother of Glory says at the end of the first chapter, that the only way to change the world is through intentional directed violence.
Which is a question it does not answer.
Which is good. Like, I don't think
yes.
I don't think that we have an answer for that. And I think that really the answer is sometimes the only change can only be affected through intentional directed violence. And sometimes intentional directed violence does nothing but kill a bunch of people.
Yes. I mean, we see it sort of, in this case, we see it held up next to, as you pointed out, unintentional, randomly directed violence, which serves to perpetuate this system. And so maybe under those circumstances, a little bit of direction is exactly what needs to. I mean, the violence, as you point out, the scene with the 4 burned corpses. It's like, we missed all 4 of them, but here these guys will do.
We rounded up 4 other people who have some degree of emotional connection to you, exactly. Including poor original Perot, who whose mom stole his student ID.
Really hard.
Like his mom steals his student ID, gives it to Feder because she's got radical sympathies. Speaking of bad moms.
Because her cool friend asked her to, yeah.
Right.
And cool, because well-respected friend.
Right. Well, right. And pamphleteer. And again, it was, she didn't think any harm could come of it, and she wanted to help the revolution a little bit, and just had no thought about,
her son being burned alive. Yeah.
So, and then the other 3 never even get named. We know that they were people who had some sort of they were like Feder's old neighbors or something, but nobody, not even Feder's shadow, remembers who they are. And Feder might. He never gets told, I don't think.
Right.
But, not even Feder's...
he does get told.
Okay.
But, the shadow I remember is not privy to his interiority at that point.
Oh, that's right. Inside. That's right. So we don't actually know how he feels about it or whether or not he recognizes them. Just that he does get told. It keeps coming back to, there's a lot of people who don't remember these people, or at least are definitely going to claim that they don't.
Right. No, all of that was good. I loved that, speaking of why he knew all these people, I love the early part where Feder is the guy who is in the sort of, again, this is a metaphor that works 3 different ways, but he's in the part of the city where new people to the city goes, but he doesn't move along like the rest of them. Right. So he's in
the part of the city where they put in refugees and new citizens.
So therefore he becomes the elder statesman of childhood.
Yes.
He's the Prince of Neoteny who helps other people get through their difficult entrance in the system without ever moving along himself, which is just such a perfect role for a guy in his position.
And then he has all of these experiences and moves along, and he comes back and nobody remembers him, or at least nobody claims to. So, having moved past that stage of his life, he can no longer access the cachet he had of being, the elder statesman of the child adults.
So let's talk about the ending, since I remember you saying that you found the ending somewhat frustrating.
Not even frustrating. I found it a little bit dissatisfying. partly because the sudden shift to Fetter's shadow I thought was great. And
I really enjoyed
and
that.
the loss of Fetter's interiority I thought worked really well. The thing is that I didn't, the shadow just sort of picks a direction and heads away, which is fine. But I didn't feel like I didn't feel like we'd gotten enough of a sense of the shadow as a character for that to feel like a satisfying narrative payoff. And meanwhile, nothing really, we don't know what happens with Fetter. He claims that, he is the world. And
I still don't know what that means. I've been thinking about that. I don't understand what he means by that at all.
Well, he is the only person who can.
Ideas?
I mean, he's the only person left now who can access the empty realms.
That is true. He is the Saint of Bright Doors that his father wanted him to be.
And
ultimately,
but, I think that it's also. So the way that I read it was that this is Fetter, who we no longer get to see inside of it, and it only works because we can't see inside of Fetter. Fetter has, gone through all of these different stages of emotional. I'm not even going to say growth, but like emotional changes.
he is the world in the sense that...
And arrives at this like ultimate self-centeredness where I am the sole definer of reality. I am the arbiter of reality. And, that doesn't work if you can see inside him, because if you can see inside him, it has to be true or false. And if it's true, then that's a terrible, weird, like that collapses all the metaphors in a bad way. And if it's false, which is, then it also doesn't really work. It works better, but except that then it just becomes this, it also collapses all the metaphors, because then it just becomes this like sad story of one man's self-delusions. So you have to leave it, that door untranslated. No,
you're right. I sort of viewed it as like, because it comes up because he calls himself the world in the context of a conversation where they're again relitigating whether change only happens through directed and intentional violence.
Right. And to what extent, to what extent and in what ways Fetter is going to continue serving the revolution.
Right. Because he still does not have Cole's politics, but he is on Cole's side because, as he continues to say, he's here, isn't he? Because there's no other place for him to be at that point.
Right.
And like, I think maybe what he means when he calls himself the world is that he has been changed by directed and intentional violence. And that's why he is loath to do it himself, even though Cole insists that he's going to. That he understands himself as the world because he understands himself as the subject of violence. This is a thought that I had on my second reading. On the first reading, I thought that the ending was, he's going to become his father. Here he is on the battlements, getting ready to be a cult leader again.
I think that reading does also work. So, my main problem with the ending, other than, again, that I didn't feel like the shadow was quite as well foreshadowed, as it were, to give me more investment in its narrative payoff. But also, this is one where, again, the metaphor is working in a lot of different ways, but I didn't feel like it didn't feel quite as successful and well-rooted as so many of the other things in the book. It's the sort of thing that, would be completely forgivable in another book. Part of this is just that it's real hard to end something, and, the book has set extremely high expectations from the reader and has been consistently hitting those marks, that, when the end leaves me going, I don't know.
Sure.
On the other hand, the end will probably stay with me, and, and like my brain is going to keep poking at it. So sometimes something can be unsatisfying and still end up being, an artistic success. But it still didn't quite work for me the way that most of the book did.
I agree. I think that it did work for me on that emotional level, but I think that that's largely because of what I brought into the book. Because when I saw like the Unfettered, the Shadow's relationship to Fetter, my immediate thought was, oh, this is his brother. Like,
yes, that would be how you would read it.
Yeah, no, but like this is his little brother who is defined by his, who, despite being ignored and, you know, not being the chosen one, again, you know, all of these metaphors keep ramifying down levels, which is how you can tell it's good literature. But like who's been like literally and metaphorically invisible in the shadow of a brother who himself has failed to be the chosen one, in the shadow and being the shadow. You know, like the sort of, in part, you know, I enjoy it because when you get the reveal of who the shadow is, then a lot of the stuff where it seems like we were zooming in and out of Fetter's brain earlier.
Yeah, that works really well. Yeah.
But also, like, I really felt like that thing where the shadow is like, I hate him. No, I don't hate him. You know, like, it's like, why is he so fucking cavalier with his life? Doesn't he realize that it's my life, even though he doesn't even know if it's his life? You know, it's the overcoming the fear of losing everything that defines you if you walk away from this person, and just walking away or floating away. That felt powerful to me, but I that's because I was bringing all my own like life history into that character. So I can't say whether that was there.
Right. And it does work as this is, you know, the ignored child versus the sort of the center of the toxic parent, toxic parenting. I mean, it also
because
works,
that's always a part of this. Yeah. You know, if there's more than one child.
If there's more than one child, then there's always going to be favorites and less favorites, and even if they're constantly shifting.
Yes.
But I think it's, you know, because it also does sort of work as this is also a part of Fetter's consciousness that has been ignored and suppressed for so long, and now this person who is as much Fetter as all the other Fetters we've seen is consciously walking away from all of this. And again, that can kind of work, except that I didn't have quite enough of a sense of the shadow. The shadow is so much defined by Fetter that his decision to walk away from Fetter doesn't, you know, he's walking away and he's not walking towards, and that's part of the point, but it felt incomplete.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of, not to say, oh, it works the same way as this again, you know, but there is a sort of an answering incompleteness there, because, like, the book says he goes in the only other direction he knows, which means his universe is still defined by Fetter, in much the same way that Fetter there on the balcony or on the battlements on the barricade.
It's saying that the universe is defined by him.
Right, and is still defined by, you know, his mother and his father's legacy, which have consumed his life to such a degree that that there is absolutely no action that he can take that isn't in some way a reaction to one or the other.
Right. Or at least no action that he sees that he can take. And again,
exactly.
Except for, again, that's the shadow just walking away.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Good stuff. Great book. Glad that we glad that we were able to categorize it as wizards versus lesbians, even if the lesbian wasn't the main character.
Yeah.
But all sorts, but between Fetter's mother and Coel, who's sort of trying to appoint herself a substitute parental figure, we definitely have Fetter as the battlefield between the wizard and the lesbians.
Yes, indeed. He is the he is the map, which is also the territory.
Yes.
After reading this book, I dreamed that I had been sent to a house where a woman had died, and I had to go through a series of elaborate rituals to get to her room, which was at the far end, and inside I found large canvases painted with the loud late 1980s patterns of the sweatpants that my mother sewed for me when I was a 5-year-old child. And these canvases were full of power, but then reality was reset, and I was tasked with moving everyone out of this house. And it was only while I was driving the truck to our next port of call that I thought to look at my phone and see if any images from the previous reality were recorded on it. On to little things we liked. excuse me, I really liked the way that when he's growing up, he can't tell what things he's experiencing are normal parts of childhood and which are effects of his weirdness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's like, man, I'm late. I'm not getting tall and, hitting puberty like the rest of these kids. I wonder if this is part of the magic.
Right.
I'm like, no, he's just a late bloomer.
And also he's just naturally kind of short.
Exactly. And like his attempting to figure out the extent of his powers and which ones are just like part of the human experience, I thought was really good. I think I mentioned already that I really liked the various ways in which he loses his mind and then comes back to himself, and how that's just sort of part of his experience in the world. But that doesn't like make him into this like gibbering wreck, because he can put on whatever mask he needs under most circumstances to talk to the right person and while being the right person. That felt very relatable to me.
Yeah, that was really well done. I have one that's with Hedge. The fact that Hedge always randomly forwards him things, and he has to like wait and sort of delicately work it into later conversations so that he can figure out whether or not he's supposed to like laugh condescendingly, oh how that thing you forwarded me, oh yes, let's feel superior to it, or go, oh yeah, no, that sounds cool.
Now that's a thing that my dad does.
Right, but it's such a great, you're feeling insecure in this relationship, and
yes, here's an older guy from an established cultural milieu, and he's going to drop this on you because he can't even assume that you won't react to it in the way that he would.
And just this need to figure out which is the right reaction. Instead of just reacting, you have to figure out what the right reaction is.
Yes.
Meanwhile,
Hedge has stocked his flat with tea that won't offend Hedge's sensibilities in the background. Yes.
In general, like really everything about his relationship with Hedge is just like perfect, I think. Including the sort of, you don't get it until after he thinks that Hedge might be dead, or then finds out that he wasn't, until where that's when you find out that Hedge was like, oh, hey, by the way, do you want to just come with me to the resort so we can wait out the plague / genocide year? And Feder, is like, no. And Hedge, instead of trying to talk him into it, despite the fact that he, Hedge has specifically called him out as somebody who's not going to handle this well. It's just like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a certain point. It's like, there's always that, when you're dating somebody who is less stable than you, there's always that invisible, okay, well, you're not going to go beyond this point of risk because it's not worth it. Bye.
Yeah.
There's that invisible line always. And boy, is the person who's being dated aware of it. Although Feder isn't, because he's not aware of a lot of things.
But
I love the way that when he flirts with Pippa, when he's making the coconut leaf pots, like he does so by just letting another one of his selves out for a second.
Yes.
And then bringing it back in. It's like, oh, I know what will make you interested. It's like, I'm just going to turn the angle of myself a little bit so you can see something, and then snap it back. That also feels really true to life.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing where, he has a moment with Pippa and then is like confessing it to Hedge, and Hedge is like, and it's great because, first of all, on first read, it makes Hedge just look like this sort of perfect boyfriend, right? He's the cosmopolitan, older, richer man who's just like, it's okay to have feelings for other people. We can talk about opening the relationship if you want, but don't worry, I'm too busy to see other people. And then on second read, you're like, oh, no, he's trying to work through this complicated, emotional, moment, and Hedges just immediately slots it into something else and dismisses it.
Yes. This is for the Disco Elysium boys out there. Hedge is a bit like the Sunday Friend in some ways.
Sure.
But, yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. There are worse references you could work in.
That is absolutely true, and I'm not going to. Actually, here's a Pratchett reference. The admittedly incredibly funny bit where he first of all, the incredibly funny bit that there's a surveillance drone in the sky, but it's just a guy who's a monk in a saffron robe.
Yes. Which, you know, because again, you think this is all automated,
Magellan,
but actually it's a person.
Right. And like Magellan is what you would name a drone or a helicopter or something,
exactly.
but it's a guy. You know, but and also the incredibly funny way in which Feder kills him.
Yes, that's where he negotiates his relationship with fire such that he can non-suicide bomb the man.
Yeah, but the what I wanted to call out was also like when he hits the ground, and the people resolutely fail to see what just happened because it doesn't fit into their schema.
That's very Pratchett, yeah.
Exactly, it is very Pratchett, but I like the way that it's like it's the same sort of idea about magic, but in Pratchett it's sort of a, you know, a more, it's coming from one political perspective from Pratchett where it's like, you know, the people refuse to see what they don't want to see, whereas in this one it's like the people, this is not a legible moment for the people. It is not categorizable, and therefore they cannot, you know, understand it.
Oh, but see, I think there's another read on it, right? Because the Pratchett version is that, you know, well, people refuse, you know, people will just sort of edit out reality, but those of us who can see truly, like, you know, the witches, those of us who have the id, and so it's a very sort of, you know, patronizing view, and I love Pratchett, but there's a lot of sort of patronizing soft.
That was kind of what I was trying to say, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to.
Well, I'm willing to take that bullet, but and then the people here, the book has done such a good job of setting up what's going on that, I mean, they can't see it because also it was an act of terrorism, and seeing it and understanding what it was would make them culpable and thus subject to the violence of the state.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
You know, it's suddenly, it's not that people's little, you know, it's not that the little people's little minds can't process this. It's that people's self-preservation is such that there are things that being obviously aware of can put your life in danger. And if you grow up or just spend enough time in a certain kind of environment, you learn how to not see things.
Yes.
Which again also ends up working really well for, you know, talking about Feder's relationship with his parents.
Indeed. Do we want to say anything about the Perfect and Kind since we've barely discussed him?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do like that he's, you know, he's made up to be this, like, he's made up to be both this supervillain and this, like, charismatic mega preacher. And then you meet him and he's just a guy, which is, you know, so that's like classic wizarding, right?
Right. It's so John Gaius, and also like,
and also Belthandros
and also Belthandros, and this book also has an awful dinner party with older people in it.
Yes.
Which I think is just going to happen in books written by people of this generation because we all have this childhood of like, you know, of having to be there while our parents snipe at each other or, you know, have political arguments or whatever. And but yeah, no, you're right. He's 100% classic wizards versus lesbians wizard.
But you know, it's also that he's one of those people who initially you think he has this fantastic charisma, and maybe he does. This is an example where the charisma does not shine through the page, and I don't know if that is deliberate or not. But just, you know,
no, his ordinariness is very much what we're leaning
right
on.
I think so, and it's because it turns out that a lot of his charisma is very much is a combination of being propped up by enforcers, and the rest of his charisma is just the ability to sort of laugh disdainfully at people.
Yeah,
you know, if you can laugh disdainfully at people and then back that up with violence, that looks a lot like charisma.
Yeah, no, that is 100% correct. Like even the first time that we see him from Mother of Glory's eyes, he's, you know, he might be charming, but he's cruel victory, and he's got his, you know, an army behind him even then, you know.
Yes, and shout out to Ordinary, who is immediately like, no, fuck this guy, and storms off.
She calls him a dick weasel,
yes,
which is just very funny in the context of calling, you know, God that, basically, right, in this world.
You know, well, God or the Dalai Lama or whatever.
Yeah, or that's probably an unfortunate one to have chosen. Yes.
You know, it's, I mean, I don't know, one of the things that this reminded me of was the recent genocide in Myanmar, where, you know, right, like, because one of the things that this book does a good job, it does not matter if your religion is the perfect and kind. This also works really for any religion, and all the various genocides perpetrated, and or charismatic atheist groups.
Yeah. We should mention, probably for those who don't know, which is probably an unfortunate number of people in the world, that this is also taking a lot from the actual genocide that happened in Sri Lanka in around 2009, 2010.
But that it does not matter if your religion is about being perfect and kind and, disdaining bodily needs. It's like there's really no correspondence between the tenets of a religion and what the people in power do.
Yes. Although his disdain for bodily needs is what ends up getting him killed.
Yes.
Which is a fun thing, because it's almost exactly what happened to Jean Gaius after that terrible dinner party in Harrow. So.
Well, and it's also what does, people who think that they are, that people who really think that they are above their body. This ties into your meat jingle.
Yeah. We could mention Gandhi.
We could, sure.
Yeah, and his penchant for various activities. But anyway,
I was gonna say, or we could just isn't that part of why Steve Jobs died? Was because he kept doing really weird alternative medicine treatments for his cancer.
Yes, there are many people we can mention. The millionaire who is currently getting daily blood transfusions from his own son in an attempt to live forever.
We can edit this whole thing out.
No, I won't. And the name of the multimillionaire, not billionaire, is Brian Johnson with a Y. And his son is 17 years old.
My main point was that it does not matter. I mean, he is somewhat of a hypocrite when it comes to some of these things, and that, he's getting sucked off by his secretary. But it also doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter what the faith is.
No, that is clearly the point, because you can, part of the joke for people who are not for American readers of this book is that the right wing talking heads who go on TV to call for violence are named things like jewel of precious wisdom and things like that.
Yes.
It's like it doesn't matter what faith we're talking about or what path we're talking about, as long as there's the path.
Yeah, pretty much. So all right, are we about ready to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think so. I think I could keep talking about this book forever, but we shouldn't.
Right.
So next time on Wizards vs. Lesbians, I believe we're going to be discussing the ex-wives of Dracula, which will be a bit of a change of pace.
Total change of pace. Total change of pace, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, indeed. But until then, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Yana has a different reading of the end, which we both found pretty persuasive, which is that the book is, despite everything, a narcissistic fantasy, in the sense that Fetter's mom and dad are literally gods who shaped the world, and he is the most special little boy while simultaneously being hurt and degraded. Not only does it literalize the narcissistic parent mythology, it literalizes the golden child's place in the cosmos. In this reading, he says that he is the world because he's actually the center of the universe. The story has coalesced around him, made him as central as he thought he always was. And the fleeing of the shadow at the end should be considered a failure of Jungian individuation, because we went through this whole episode talking about a character with a living shadow without talking about Jung. We didn't talk about Kafka either. This book cannot be adequately summed up in this format, but we did our best.